So thanks everyone again for joining. We're really excited about this. Next, not last is not least, we have a really robust panel for the last one of the day. And Sarah, if you want to go ahead and pull the slide deck up, and I'll turn it over to Shireen to introduce the next panel. And thanks again to all of you for joining.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm really excited to hear from our next panelists. It's kind of my job actually to reach outside the watershed, outside the collaborative, and engage more people so that we can hear what others are doing, but also form new partnerships and learn to become more effective. Our first speaker, Ken, will be talking about a site in Alexandria, and it's a urban freshwater tidal shoreline. And Ryan, because we have this freshwater tidal shoreline that we're trying to implement, we were really interested to hear about the trials and errors of environmental quality resources. Then we'll be hearing from Robin Woolsey with the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District about the partnership that's formed between them and the Northern Neck Master Gardeners Group, which Ian will cover. And then we have Bhaskar again speaking to us about Maryland DNR and all the great work that's being done up in Maryland. So we're looking forward to hearing from each of these speakers, and we'll start with Ken.
Great. Thanks, Shireen.
And again, if you have questions for folks, feel free to put them in the chat roll as we move forward. That's great.
All right. See my slides?
Looks perfect.
Thanks. So I think thanks for the introduction, Shireen. I am going to talk about Windmill Hill Park. It's a shoreline restoration that we did for the city of Alexandria in the Old Town portion of Alexandria. There we go. So just real quickly, just to dial you into where this project's located. It's up in Northern Virginia, right outside Washington, D.C. And it is actually just inside the Beltway on the Potomac River. It is the second largest tributary to the Chesapeake Bay. And it's just upstream of the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, which you'll see in the background of some of my pictures. So you can see this is a section of freshwater tidal portion of the Potomac. It is one of very few coves into the shoreline in this part of Alexandria. It's a very urban shoreline. The tidal range is about 2.5 feet within this site. Our project site is basically bordered by residential housing, multi-story housing, as well as the park that also shares its name on the opposite side of the road from where we're working. Our work area primarily is within the cove area. So a little bit about the area. Yeah, section of waterfront, it has a really long history. Over the past century, it's changed quite a bit. Back at about 1900, it was a soft shoreline that over the years transformed as the area did. So from a soft shoreline to a hard one, from mixed kind of industry to primary residential, and from kind of a port of trade, this is one of the areas trade went in and out of, to be largely recreational. Towards the end of the 20th century, the marina was no longer really used and fell into some disrepair. You can see from 99 to 2000, the last portions of the docks for the Merino were removed. So talking, and EQR is an environmental contractor. So we didn't participate so much in the project development time. We were awarded the project, which was our beginning with the project. But I think it's interesting to know just a little bit about the timeline that the project came to happen. So back in 2003, a master plan was approved by the city council. The Alexandria waterfront small area plan was adopted in 2012. The concept development really got into full swing mid 2014. It went through multiple concept iterations, and actually came to construction plans and final design towards August of 2016. My company, EQR, was awarded the project in March of 2017. So this is an aerial view that kind of shows the precondition of the park that we worked in. The shoreline, shows a high density on either side of it, surrounding the shoreline, as well as the remainder of the park. The namesake park, Windmill Hill Park, is directly across the street. We did not do any work in that portion of the park. Ours focused from South Union Street to the east. And it had three main parts to it. The first part was removal of approximately 800 foot of failing concrete and timber bulkhead, the remnants of the marina, to replace it with a living shoreline. The other two parts, the second was to perform a small stream restoration from the outfall of a storm drain to where it joined the shoreline. The third was to improve the recreational opportunities within the park, improving open space, connecting an existing hiker-biker trail from the south to the north through our project along the shoreline, as well as installing some hard surface kayaks and canoe launches. So we're going to concentrate mostly on the shoreline. Our implementation of installing the shoreline is definitely some interesting things that I know I haven't come across in the shorelines we've done that we'll talk about towards the end. Just generally the implementation timeline. We were awarded in March of 2017. We completed, received substantial completion in November of 2018. A full 21 months of implementation. The first 3 months, we made it through the contracting process, installed the perimeter pedestrian and erosion and sediment controls. In June of 17, we started the demolition of the existing bulkhead and installation of the working platform to install the select fill that made up the shoreline. Once the platform was in place, we installed the base of the approximately 850 foot of stone sills out in front of the shoreline. In August, we performed the stream stabilization while completing the initial installation of the shoreline sand. So this one was a little bit different in a lot of the shorelines that we do, in that in September, we installed wick drains through the working platform that we installed that went 40 to 50 foot down into the substrate. This is the first time we've ever installed wick drains in a shoreline situation. after we installed them, again, they went 40 or 50 feet deep into the sediment, and they're installed on a like 8x8 grid, so very tight spacing in between the wick drains installed. We then removed the displaced sediment between the working platform and surcharged the shoreline to prevent to the pre-settlement grade. So basically the wick drains were installed to allow the sediment to bleed water out. We put surcharge on top as the additional weight to help speed that process along. In November of 17, the settlement period started. And within our contract, it was anticipated that the settlement would take no longer than 90 days. So with that surcharge on top, all the sediment will be sped up through the wick drains within the 90 days. So during the settlement period, we worked outside of the settlement area, installing green infrastructure techniques and rock walls kind of as the foundation for some of the park improvements that we did. Let's see, the settlement period was complete in March. We were able to finish grade the shoreline and then install the park features without concern of any more settling. Once we got to final grades, we started our planting and installed a pedestrian bridge over the newly completed stream restoration project. The final months of the project were finishing, basically for the park installation. So irrigation, landscaping, and that pedestrian pathway that ran throughout the site. The park was substantially complete in November of 18. We are very proud of this project and thankful for the opportunity to work with the city, who I don't believe is here today, on the project. You know, it definitely is a huge, no matter which direction you look at it, it's a huge improvement to the failing bulkheads that were there previously. So every day, you know, I think we all come to what we do looking for the challenges that the day will bring. You know, being an environmental contractor, and I find those challenges every day. You know, I think we go to all of our projects with the past experience of all the other times we've done it, and we're always thrown a curveball as to what we thought we were getting into or what we anticipated, and you know, things never 100% pan out that way. But both my takeaways, or my two main takeaways to deal with the Living Shoreline on this project, both involve a better understanding of the history of the area. You know, I think with that, I would have been a little bit better prepared to encounter some of those challenges. So this image shows the proposed improvements overlaid on the existing plan. So there is a stone sill that was out in front of the original bulkhead with windows in it. The bulkhead was removed and the Living Shoreline was built out to those sills. So we placed probably or 9,000 plus cubic yards of select fill on the Potomac side of that bulkhead, which is pretty common with doing a living shoreline like this. The surprise for us was how the sediment reacted, in that oftentimes when you go into a living shoreline, you're putting the select fill sandy material on top of existing bottom and you build out on it, you can stand on it relatively easy. This instance, we were anticipating that the loading of the sand on top of the sediment, the wick drains installed, would allow the sediment to decant and allow the water to come out from it and settle vertically. Our surprise was in that it was like a tube of toothpaste every day. We would come to the job site, and that surcharge didn't necessarily, the surcharge on top of the sediment didn't really bleed very much water through the wick drains, but rather the nature of the sediment was such that it wanted to hold on to that moisture and instead pushed out from underneath our sand layer. So what we're looking at here is the sediment is actually, I'm right on the edge of our installed sand and the working platform, and the sediment every day would work itself from underneath. So what we ended up obviously removing that sediment prior to completing the shoreline, but I think we were a little bit surprised at how it moved instead of just decanting. So understanding the site, and I'll go back one slide just to look again. And I think I will.
And Ken, just 1 minute, Ken.
Okay. So just looking at the shape of it, this was years of organic accumulation that built itself up and therefore caused that type of sediment to accumulate. The second consideration also involves the shape of the shoreline and the accumulation of the woody debris on the shoreline. And then I would just go to say real quick to close up that I think a goal to receive that flotsam and actually it added a lot of diversity to the plant material and the waterfront instead of trying to fight it. And that's it.
Great, what a great presentation. I know Shireen is gonna transition to the next speaker, but really thank you. Ken, you do have some good questions in the chat roll. We will have a little less time for presentations after this panel, so feel free to reply in the chat roll and then we'll see where we go. Oh, look at that, that's awesome. All right, over to you, Shireen, and thanks so much, Ken.
Thank you, Ken. That was great. And please feel free to respond in the chat. There are some questions. Next, we're actually going to have Ian from the Northern Neck Master Gardeners speak about the shoreline evaluation program, and then Robin will follow with how these groups have become connected and benefited from each other.
Great, Ian, you might be on mute.
I was. Okay.
Perfect.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to address you on behalf of the Northern Neck Master Gardeners and our Shoreline Evaluation Program, which we refer to as SEP. To begin, I will briefly familiarize you with SEP. Oops. It's not moving slides here.
If you hit the space bar, Ian, would that work for you? Or hit your right-hand arrow?
Okay, here we go. Right. So to begin with, I'm going to familiarize you with SEP and then spend a few minutes on why collaboration has been so important to the program and review 3 successful collaborations. All right. Founded to contribute to the restoration of Chesapeake Bay, SEP is a program to assist Northern Neck homeowners protect their waterfront property. SEP provides service to 4 Northern Neck counties, which are essentially rural. We have 1,100 miles of shoreline, much of which has been developed as individual residential property. Our evaluation approach is to recommend measures that will improve property protection and ways that will also preserve habitat and reduce sediment and toxin pollution of nearshore water. To do that comprehensively, we assess the protection needs of the total property, including interactions within the property and possible effects from adjoining properties and roads. We term this approach integrated shoreline protection. This slide summarizes all 4 components of the SEP program, the core element being the homeowner property evaluations. Today, though, I will focus on collaborations. The first collaboration predates SEP, but it's very relevant to SEP development. It was a project to resolve a stormwater runoff problem and create a demonstration living shoreline. Located in Reedville in Northumberland County, adjacent to the Fisherman's Museum, the project involved the church, whose property it is on, the museum, the Northern Neck Master Gardeners, several other local volunteer groups, and state organizations as listed on the slide. The project was very successful in achieving its aims. As noted, the garden demonstrates a number of key shoreline protection elements. We recommend to homeowners who are contemplating installing a living shoreline or improving their RPA buffer to visit the garden for information and inspiration. The garden has been in place for 16 years and has been maintained by the Northern Neck Master Gardener Group with assistance from the Fisherman's Museum. I cannot emphasize enough how important that ongoing maintenance has been. Without it, the project would have died long ago. Another result of this project was that the participating Master Gardeners and Karen During of VIMS developed a relationship that later became the catalyst to the inception of SEP. In 2009, with the Great Recession and reduced state funding, resulted in the elimination of the VIMS homeowner service. This led to the idea that Northern Neck Master Gardeners could pick up the VIMS service for the Northern Neck. Karen and the Master Gardener proponents got together and developed a plan to offer a substitute service. Agreed to, the initial 2-year period of the plan involved education, training, practice, and procedure development. In March of 2012, SEP was launched, and this year we're completing our 10th year of operations. During that time, the relationship with VIMS has endured. We interact at least twice a year with information exchange and custom training events. SEP could not have been established without this collaboration, and that continues to be true today. To date, we have completed close to 300 property evaluations, and we interact face-to-face with shoreline property owners, about 500 to 600 a year. Recently, we updated and documented our SEP procedures and methodologies to improve our onboarding of new recruits, which brings me to our first know-how transfer to a third party and our third collaboration this afternoon. Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District, in partnership with the James City County Williamsburg Master Gardeners, were interested in launching a sediment reduction program with homeowners in their district. They thought SEP could fit the bill. We were requested to collaborate with training for this new program. We agreed and have provided evaluation procedures and on-the-ground training for the group, including a field trip to the Reedville Shoreline Demonstration Garden. Robin will relate more of this story in a moment. In closing, we have found that longer-term collaborations depend very much on knowing what situations might work for your organization. As a Master Gardener group, we have capabilities, limitations, and constraints most organizations do. Even with common goals, it is often difficult to establish a collaboration if there are operating, resource, and philosophical differences. Finding the right situation and making it work is challenging. However, from our experience, a successful collaboration can be very effective and rewarding. That is our story. I thank you for your attention and now hand the baton to Robin to expand on their experience.
Thank you. And Robin, if you could go ahead, if you could stop sharing your slides, that would be great. And Robin will share her slides. And I would just like to say that I have heard from Karen that that first demonstration garden has given inspiration to a lot of other projects, including one that's at the Tides Inn now. So it's been very successful.
Okay.
All right, thanks Ian so much, and thanks Shireen as well. I'm just going to talk briefly about what we're doing in the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District. We're based in Williamsburg, Virginia, and if you're not familiar with soil and water conservation districts, just briefly, we are subdivisions of the Commonwealth that are tasked with providing technical, educational, and when possible, financial assistance to landowners and community members who want to improve their conservation efforts. So throughout the past couple of years, we in our Colonial District have sort of identified a lack of technical assistance specifically for shorefront property owners in our area. And with the changing regulations and policies surrounding shoreline stabilization permitting and living shorelines, we sort of started to anticipate that we would see a lot more demand for assistance from these shorefront property owners. And we wanted to sort of make ourselves prepared to be able to answer some of those questions or calls for assistance. And of course, we've also recognized the great impact that living shorelines can have on reaching our Chesapeake Bay goals for the 2025 TMDL. So we had this great sort of storm of opportunity that came up that really led us to the objective that we're showing here on this slide to be able to work with shorefront property owners to contribute to the reduction of nutrients and sediments into the Chesapeake Bay. So a little bit of background about how we got here. In our Colonial District, which includes Charles City, New Kent, James City, and York counties, as well as the city of Williamsburg, we've got just over 1,000 miles, so not quite as much as Northern Neck, but we're getting there. Shoreline, and a lot of that includes a lot of smaller residential lots. So we just have a ton of opportunity to be able to connect with these landowners and provide some education about why it's important to improve conservation on their property. So we began discussing some of these ideas and our desire to be involved with some of our regional partners, and Shireen was a huge help in connecting us to Karen During and to Ian at the Northern Neck program. We were able to meet with Ian and Karen and learn more about the SCP, and as we went through those conversations, we realized that the SCP would be such a great fit for what we're trying to do down here, and would really help us improve our outreach and education goals around shorelines. So with support from Ian and Karen and Mary Turville, who I think is also on this call, we were able to partner with our James City County Williamsburg Master Gardeners to start working on implementing the SCP in our area. So since then, it's been about a year now that we've really been working consistently on program implementation. We've done a lot of training. We're so grateful to Karen and her availability to provide Zoom trainings for us in this pandemic year. We haven't missed a beat because of those Zoom trainings, and we've been really appreciative of that. We have gotten a chance to get out on a couple of site visits, as you can see here in these photos, and have really made great strides in that sense. So thank you to all the folks listed on the screen who have helped us with training. And of course, Ian and Mary have been truly vital to our ability to take on this program and start to get comfortable with completing some of the assessments that we're going to be doing through the program. So then my last slide here, just some goals that we're trying to keep in mind as we begin to actually implement the program here. Our first goal, first and foremost, is to increase landowner awareness and understanding of how they can improve their property management to make sure that they are contributing to conservation, not just on the shoreline itself, but also in the upland property in any buildings or other stormwater management concerns they might have. So that's our first step, increase awareness and understanding. When we get folks, landowners, property owners who are interested in taking the next step and actually installing a best management practice or installing a living shoreline, we're then going to be able to help direct them to the appropriate resources, be it technical advice or financial assistance as well. So that's what we've got on the horizon. We're really excited to keep working on training and actually start to implement some of our own site assessments through the SCP as well. So I think that's all I've got time for. Thanks again to everyone. Happy to be here and happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
Thank you, Robin. And I'm just going to go ahead and key up Bhaskar next, and he'll be our final speaker.
Bhaskar, you're on mute. Just, you might know that already, but we can see your slides in presenter mode. Now we can hear you. Yep.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yep, sure can.
Okay. Let's see.
Well, Bhaskar's pulling that up. What amazing presentations today, folks. Haven't they just been remarkable across the board? So big shout out to all our presenters. Just tremendous work. So it looks like it's not quite in presentation mode yet, Bhaskar, but almost.
I'm gonna give it another shot.
Sounds good.
Let me see.
And Sierra is ready to roll too, Bhaskar. If you would like for Sierra to share your slides, that's a possibility too.
Oh yeah, if you don't mind, yeah, that's if you can do that, that'll be great. I'm so
great. You'll
sorry,
just have to. Oh, no problem. You'll just have to stop sharing yours. There you go.
Mine. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, do this presentation. Living Shorelines is something that it's not only my job. This is something that I love dearly. The ability to actually connect with people and be able to actually, share the resources that we have at the state is something that I think I'm very, very lucky about. Next slide. So my topic today is living shorelines and Maryland experience. I make this, before I do my talk, I always talk about, I give a little primer on erosion. Erosion is not necessarily a bad thing. It's something that is extremely, extremely important to maintain, the beaches and the marshes and the offshore habitat. So those, that movement of material is indicative of the ecological health of the estuary that we all depend on. Next slide, please. In Maryland, we have, close to 7,000 miles of shoreline, and we have 23 counties, of which 16 of them are coastal counties. And the waves hitting the shoreline, the land water interface is an extremely important and an extremely interesting area. Next slide, please. So traditionally, mankind has actually tried to protect their shorelines using traditional, revetments, basically rock against the bank or wooden bulkheads. Next slide, please. And all of these things, in many cases, we've gone overboard, putting riprap on top of bulkheads and bulkheads on top of revetments. And before we know it, we're trying to actually build the Great Wall of China in many of the shorelines, which wanted to make a mention that that's not sustainable, nor should it be the case. Next slide. So if you look at Maryland's Chesapeake Bay, about 200 miles of that shoreline is armored, and that's just in Maryland. And more than 50% of the bay tributaries are also hardened in one shape or form. Next slide. And these are 2 or 3 examples. I've actually stole these pictures from Karen during the presentation from before, where, these are classic, every day I go to a shoreline and this is what we see. Somebody calling us and saying, hey, my bulkhead is gone, or the area behind my bulkhead is completely, disintegrating. And so this is why I usually try to tell folks, this is what we do. This is what we get when we try to fight nature instead of working with it. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, we have the next slide come up. Okay. Is there a slide before it? Okay. So usually when I talked about there are 16 coastal counties with erosion, I try to actually tell folks that this information is extremely important. This is a study that WIMS actually did for us back in 2006, 2007. And that is basically trying to figure out, when we talk about erosion, erosion doesn't come in one flavor. It comes in so many different forms. And so we have a gradient of 0 to 2 feet per year that's considered slight erosion, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, and over 8 feet a year. Now, if you really look at it very closely, 87% of the Maryland shorelines experience slight to no erosion. Next slide, please. On the same token, I like to put this slide up all the time. My program, the Shoreline Conservation Service, has been in existence since '68. We did a lot of structural projects and we did a lot of living shoreline projects. If you look at these columns right here, almost similar number of projects, structural and living shorelines. And the reason I marked the amount of state loan is mainly because we've heard from contractors that living shorelines is too expensive. This slide is basically discrediting that. This is hard data from our program. So for the skeptics, living shoreline projects are affordable. They don't have to actually break your back. Next slide, please. Now, there are so many different definitions of living shorelines. I'm so glad that nobody actually got into the definition, because it's a very complicated thing, because each of us bring our own definitions to it. So in DNR also has a definition for us. We like to have our own definition too. So basically 2 things. One is that it's basically a suite of techniques that minimizes erosion and maintains coastal process. Now, there is an irony in this sentence right now, because erosion is a coastal process. So living shorelines are not trying to stop erosion. A good living shoreline project might actually end up reducing the rate of erosion. So the next couple of slides, if you can go forward. I did an assessment of 200 plus projects, and about 131 of them were good or better. And so because of that, we have, we strongly believe that natural features, green infrastructure is what we should be investing our efforts in. Next slide, please. So this is an example of how a conventional living shoreline project looks like. Again, a sill project is basically rock parallel to the shoreline, backfilled with sand, and planting 2 kinds of grasses. This is a classic living shoreline projects from the 90s. They were the state of the art back then. We've done many of these projects. If you go to the next slide, we've also, over the years, I try to give the fiberglass boat analogy, where when the fiberglass boat were actually manufactured, a lot of material was put into it. They were floating, and slowly and steadily that industry tried to tweak it and see how can you actually reduce the material that you put in, but then it still floats. So the fiberglass boats of today are a lot lighter than it was before. And so the next slide will actually show you a picture of a living shoreline projects that we have in Maryland. So living shoreline projects have evolved quite a bit. This project is actually, I like to name my projects because I'm not an engineer. I want to be able to connect to that, average property owner. So if I tell them headland breakwaters, means nothing to them. But instead, if I say crab claw design, this shoreline was eroding. And then what we basically did was put two, claws to this project. And that's all we did. This is a crab claw design. So if anybody wants to actually use this term crab claw, please do. And just make sure you send me the royalty for the name. So next slide. I wanted to show you one good example of what we call it the next gen project. It's the next generation of Living Shoreline project. The next couple of slides, if we go to the next one, this is Conquest Preserve. If you look at the left, that is how the project looked before, the shoreline looked like before. And then what it looks below is what the project looks like today. So this is the reason why it's called the next gen living shorelines, is because conventional living shorelines has rock, sand, and plants. Here, this rock, which is the structural element of it, was incorporated with the sand. And this project is called a Shingle Beach. And this is the first shingle beach, man-made shingle beach project in the US. Project was completed in 2016. Army Corps, one of the Army Corps designs, Army Corps had many different, alternative analysis that they did back in 2000, before 2010. And each of them was, the revetment was $1 million, breakwater was like $1.5 million. Combination was $1.8 million. This project, if you look at the cost, $271,000. So the cost per linear foot is around $232 a linear foot. So, and again, this project, like you said, 2016, 5 years later, a couple of my colleagues actually went to the shoreline this past week, and they said, hey, everything looks the same way we put it. And so the bottom line is living shoreline projects don't have to be expensive as long as we work with nature. Next slide, please. The next couple of slides I'm going to rush because I have only 2 more minutes left. So we have legislation that, back in '68, the shore erosion control law was passed. And the next slide, in 2008, that law was actually taken and, modified, revised. And that's when we got the Living Shorelines Law of 2008. The regulations took about 5 years to pass. So it passed in 2013. So basically right now in Maryland, if you're a waterfront property owner, if you have an eroding shoreline, you have to prove to the state that living shorelines would not work. So the expectation is that, you're putting a shoreline restoration project, it's got to be a living shoreline, because we have a lot of data to actually prove. There are exceptions, and there are, and there are ways to actually get those exceptions. If you have deep waters, or, if you have SAV habitat right next to your eroding shoreline. So all of those things, you can get an exception, but the general expectation is living shoreline is the way to go. Next slide, please. Like I said, we've been doing this for quite some time. And there was a mention about funding before. And so I wanted to actually just put this slide up there. I have a loan program, a zero interest loan program for 10, 15, 20-year period. We have a resiliency through restoration initiative, which is all trying to make communities more resilient to future conditions. Maryland Department of Environment has a program. It's a linked deposit, it's a low interest loan. Then CVT Chesapeake Bay Trust has a grant program, the Restoration and Science Program, and then National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They have a couple of different grant streams where you can actually get, funding for living shoreline projects. Next slide, please. And this is the loan formula. And like I said, my presentation, Christine, is up there. If you want, you want to make it available for anybody. Next slide, please. So take-home messages, 3 messages. Working with nature is always better than working against it. We constantly, we look at past events. For instance, Hurricane Isabel came in 2003, and we are still trying to figure out, we're trying to base our future projects on something that happened in 2003. So what I'm trying to tell folks is you got to actually plan for tomorrow, today, instead of actually trying to come up with, what hurricane event you're going to actually, plan your project for. It's better to actually, come up with a project that, that you'll still have, even after the surge dissipates, you'll still have a shoreline. So try not to actually build the next Great Wall of China. There are a lot of different balls you'll have to actually juggle, but it's definitely doable. We've done it in the past and we've learned. I always tell we have amazing success and we have some colossal failures. And I have no shame about talking about either of them, because failures are how we learn from and make better projects, right? So thank you so much.
Great, awesome. And there's Bhaskar's contact info. Great photo. Well, let's thank our presenters across the board. Bhaskar, that was great.
Thank you so much.
Ken, Ian, Robin, really wonderful presentations. What a blessing for all of us. So there is a question in the chat roll. Bhaskar, can you share what a shingle shoreline design entails? I believe most of the rest of the questions have been answered, but if folks do have other questions, feel free to put them in. Emily, will you go ahead and put the evaluation link in the chat roll? And folks, hang on for 9 more minutes as we have just some exciting things coming up. So Bhaskar, back to you.
Shingle Beach, Joe, is very, very simple. This shoreline, when we went to the site, we found a lot of, pea gravel. This shoreline was a lot of gravelly shoreline. All the fines are actually gone. And what was left was those, coarse materials, which are basically pea gravel size material. So that's what nature wants there. So if I try to put a wetland there with 2 kinds of grasses, that's literally banging a square peg through a round hole, right? So instead of that, we said, you know what, we're going to actually see what nature likes. And that's what we did. We took those, cobblestones and mixed it with sand and put it on that shoreline so that it can sort itself out. Like I said, 5 years since, the project is still there. And it is a dynamic shoreline. It moves. It has a northeast exposure of about 3 miles. So nor'easters, when they come and hit it, they move, but they're still within the confines of it. So that's what a shingle beach is.
Great, awesome, good questions. I think the rest of the questions have been addressed in the chat roll. Are there any other pressing or burning questions that haven't been addressed yet in the chat roll?
There is one about maintenance maintenance costs for Bhaskar.
I saw that.
Maybe you could just type it in the chat.
Very quickly, less than 30 seconds. So we've actually, maintenance is a very, if somebody asked me of all the 200 projects, what is the one criteria that changed whether a project succeeded or failed, I would say maintenance. So maintenance is extremely crucial because there is nature involved in it. So the problem with cost for that, for maintenance is mainly because in one shoreline, it could just be those driftwood that actually came onshore and actually are on the grasses. Maintenance for that would just basically be getting somebody to actually take that and make sure that the grasses survive. So it can be as simple as that to basically going and fixing some portions of that shoreline itself. So that's why finding a cost is going to be difficult. Like living shorelines, there is no one size fit all, and there is nothing, in living shoreline that is cookie cutter. It is extremely different. So depending on what maintenance it is, there is a cost associated with it.
Great. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So much goodness. So let's thank our presenters. Again, you can find the reactions button or a round of applause. So great questions and responses. Feel free to add additional responses to the chat roll. So thanks so much to all our presenters. So we just have 5 minutes and we're going to wrap up. We do want to ask really if you could take a couple minutes and fill out that evaluation. It's really helpful for us, as well as one of the questions that we are wondering, 2 things really. What types of activities would be helpful for the Living Shoreline Collaborative to do in the coming years? So that's one thing you can add to the evaluation, or to the chat roll as we're thinking about next steps for the Living Shoreline Collaborative. There's a lot of good things already being planned, but we'd love to just hear your feedback. And then we want to share a tool, which we're not going to go into depth right now, but this is a tool that we will share by email. And this is called Social Pinpoint. And Social Pinpoint is just simply an online engagement tool. We're going to be doing a map that we'll share later with you, and we'll share this landing page. It's not quite ready yet, but there'll be ways to share specific points on the map. This is the idea wall, and I put the URL to the idea wall in here. There are 6 different topics that the Living Shoreline Collaborative Steering Committee has said we'd like to get some additional information from folks about. So building equity into living shorelines, installation best practices, monitoring and data sharing, collaboration and mentoring, research and technology, and messaging or audience. You can find out more about what we mean by those things under the little I info button. And there are ways to, info on how to use this and a little bit more of a description. It's super simple. The first time you do enter an idea, you'll need to just simply put your email address here and agree. Your information is not shared publicly. We only see it, and that's really just so that things don't get spammed. So the site doesn't get spammed. And I could type here, Shireen is awesome, and then I could hit add comment. I'm not going to type it yet, but Shireen is awesome. So are all the presenters. But once you click on something, you can see a threaded discussion will take place by that topic area. And you can see a couple ideas have already been added. You can like and dislike ideas. You can start a threaded discussion on this. And so you can start to respond to each other. You can add images. So it's a really cool tool around living shorelines to be able to get a little bit more information. So we invite you to use that tool. Again, we'll share it out with the summary at the end, but it's a really great tool just to learn a little bit more. So with that being said, we will also be developing a summary of the overall summit and sharing that out with the resources and links. And we are going to turn it over to Emily to wrap us up to talk about the next couple of years of the Living Shoreline Collaborative, or just a couple preview of the fall, and we'll put a link to the newsletter in the chat roll as well. So thanks again. Emily, over to you.
All right, so I just want to say thank you to all of the presenters. I feel so lucky to hear from each and every one of you. It's such an informative afternoon today. And I am just going to briefly talk about a snapshot of the next 2 years for the collaborative, just talking about what our action teams are working on in just a few sentences each. The monitoring team will be focusing on organizing a living shoreline monitoring network, developing low-cost monitoring protocols across multiple sectors, and creating an open source monitoring data platform, all really exciting stuff. The training team will develop a living shoreline training and certification process and really focus on establishing a network of experienced professionals to serve as trainers and mentors as we grow the number of qualified and trusted living shoreline professionals in our region. And the implementation and outreach team that for the next 2 years will be looking at filling funding gaps for living shoreline construction and maintenance, including that stewardship fund to assist impaired projects and supporting living shorelines on agricultural land, as well as sort of ramping up our outreach to homeowners and high-risk communities. So that's just a quick, very, very quick snapshot of what were our grand plans for the next couple of years. So, if you're interested in any of those topics, please either reach out to me and I can connect you with the team lead, or you can feel free to reach out to the team leads themselves. Fill out the summit evaluation. It's so helpful. And I did want to mention that we do have a site visit, an urban shorelines restorations site visit coming up in Norfolk. It's going to be hosted by the Elizabeth River Project, the City of Norfolk, and Bay Environmental, all really experienced folks in the living shoreline world. I'm really looking forward to it. There's only a few spots left, and if someone could drop that in the chat, that would be super helpful. There's an RSVP link that you can fill out and register for that. And then we also have a meeting in December. That's gonna be an open meeting. So that's just some of the other events coming up. And we're starting up a newsletter as well to keep folks updated regularly on the Living Shoreline Collaborative. And so hopefully, I'm not looking at the chat right now. So hopefully we can get that dropped in the chat as well. And it will also be in the follow-up communications that we share with you guys after the summit. So thank you so much for attending today. It's been such an educational day. And thank you to the presenters and also to the facilitators and support that have made today possible, Shireen and Christine and the rest of the dialogue and design team. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks so much. The links are in the chat roll. The first one that I do want to draw your attention to is for the field visit. So that's the one that's just a few spaces left. So that's the one you make sure you grab that one, and then our next meeting in December. So thank you everybody so much, appreciate it. And with that, we'll share more soon. So have a great rest of the day. Thanks everybody, take care, bye.